Greetings, my friend, and welcome to the podcast, Teaching That Transforms with Dr. Jimmy Knott. Thanks so much for joining me today. We're continuing with a season of episodes, and as I've said over and again, one of my favorite subjects for over the last 20 years, that's the subject of leadership. I'm calling this series, or this season, It's All About Leadership. Be a Leader Worth Following. By the way, that's the same title as my book that's available on Amazon. I encourage you to purchase it for this season of teachings because I really do think it'll be a helpful resource for you. Also can find it on my website, jimmyknott.com. jimmyknott.com. That's jimmyknott.com. Well, this is our 5th episode in this very important season on being a leader that's worth following. Anytime we seek to influence someone, their attitudes, their beliefs, their behaviors, we have just assumed the role of a leader. You don't need a title, you don't need a position. In fact, you can have authority and not necessarily be a leader. It's all about seeking to influence. And as I've told you weeks ago, many times every day, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, whether it's with friends and recreation, wherever, we're constantly, through our conversations and through our actions, trying to influence the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of someone else. So what creates influence? How do you become a leader, an influential, positively influential leader worth following? Where people want to follow you, not have to follow you. Well, my verse from the New International Version is Psalm 78:72, and these are the core components. They're all important. David shepherded them with integrity of heart. With skillful hands, he led them. What positioned David in the minds of Asaph, who wrote this psalm? What did he see in the life of David that caused him to come to the conclusion he was a leader? Well, we've talked about those 3 core ingredients. David exhibited authentic character, not perfect character, of course, but authentic, real, genuine. Exceptional competence. David was skilled at what he did. He had integrity of heart, and he was skilled. And then he made relational connections. And that's best seen here in the metaphor David shepherded them. It's not just a metaphor. Frankly, David was a shepherd boy, and he had deep personal relationships with every sheep, naming most, if not all of them. So when you put together authentic character, exceptional competence, and relational connections, chemistry, connecting with people, that puts you in a position to be a leader worth following. To be a leader worth following. So I want to begin today's lesson. Today's lesson on a leader worth following is a servant leader. A servant leader. And let me begin with this question. Are you here to serve or to be served? I mean, do you live, do you work to serve others, to help, add value, or to be served, to receive? How you answer that question will determine, frankly, your approach and philosophy of leading and influencing others. It will determine whom do you follow. How will you lead? If you're here to be served, then you'll think leadership is all about you. You'll expect, you may even demand, that people follow you, that they do what you say, many times without question. You'll not be interested in input or feedback, offering compassion, discussion, collaboration. You'll believe it's your job to keep people in line. And often you'll feel you're the most important person in the room, and they simply cannot succeed without you. That's the perspective of those who are expecting to be served. But if you're here to serve others, you'll take time to listen, to care, to invest, to protect, to develop, to get other opinions. You'll enjoy catching people doing things right and cheering them on. Those are 2 totally different philosophies and 2 very, very important philosophies. Pat Williams, who was a long-time NBA general manager for the Philadelphia 76ers years ago, moved to Orlando, Florida years ago and helped establish the Orlando Magic. Pat and his family have been longtime friends. Pat's a prolific author, and he wrote a book some time ago on servant leadership. And there are a couple of paragraphs in his book that really speak to this subject. Pat Williams says, in this world, there are two kinds of leaders, bosses and servants. Bosses wield power, issue edicts and commands, and expect to be obeyed and served. Bosses use their power to elevate the self. But servant leaders empower others, delegate authority to others, and exemplify obedience and servanthood. Servant leaders elevate others. Do servant leaders ever take charge, hold people accountable, exercise authority? You bet they do. But they do so from far different reasons and with different motives than bosses do. A boss exercises the authority of reward or punishment or compulsion. The servant leader exercises moral authority and wields the power of love. Wields the power of love. In recent episodes, we looked at those core components that make someone a leader worth following, that create positive influence in our lives and impacting the lives of others. I kind of call those three components the what of a leader worth following. Authentic character, exceptional competency, and meaningful connections. Today is really the how. How do you implement? How do you practice fleshing out those three key components? Well, the how is by being a servant leader. That's right, servant leader. It sounds like an oxymoron, a kind of an apparent paradox or contradiction, like jumbo shrimp or pretty ugly, maybe act naturally. Those words just don't seem to go together. How can someone be a leader and at the same time be a servant? Well, frankly, those two words together are only contradictory if you take the world's definition and perspective on leadership. That being telling people what to do, command and control, operating out of fear and intimidation. Honestly, every act of leadership is an act of service. You see, when you put servant leader together, leading is what a leader does. It's about vision, it's about direction, it's about execution, it's about getting results. Critical to leadership. Servant is how they do it, and that's about working with people and building meaningful relationships. So, let me ask you this question. What words come to your mind when you hear the word servant? There's a big difference in being self-serving and a servant leader. What words come to your mind about a servant? Humble? Others first? Good listener? Readily available? Those kind of words and many others come to mind. And I believe part of that can be connected to why do people lead? And they lead for different reasons. People have different motives for leading. For many, unfortunately, it's about having power and control and having more money and more perks and more authority. But frankly, the highest and really the only true motivation to lead is to serve others and your organization. That's not easy in a selfish society where take care of me first seems to rule. But serving is at the very heart, or should be at the very heart, of how we lead. In fact, this is true. I've learned by experience. The higher you rise in any organization, the more people you get to serve. Weak leaders expect to be served. Strong leaders seek to serve. As I've said many times, it's not about being in charge, but taking care of those in your charge. So, when you think of a servant leader, who comes to your mind? Who comes to your mind? Reflect for a moment. It wouldn't surprise me if a parent, a mom, a dad, a guardian, a grandparent, a friend, a coach, a past teacher, past boss, current boss. Why did that name come to your mind? What was it about them that you think maybe brought them to your mind when I ask you, when you think of a servant leader, who do you think of? Well, what about available and humble, maybe loving, caring, empathetic, secure, unselfish, they listen, and so on? Understanding the important qualities of servant leadership is frankly essential. One of my heroes in leadership is Ken Blanchard. Ken's been around for many, many years, and I'm sure all of you listening to this podcast have heard that name off the West Coast. He and his team at Blanchard Company have done a wonderful job over the years in training and equipping and coaching men and women all over the world to be leaders at every level. A few years ago, not too long ago, Blanchard and Company went across the country. I think they went to maybe 13 or 14 different cities. And it was a seminar on servant leadership. And one of the things that they did is they asked people, what do you believe are the attributes of someone who makes a servant leader? And dozens of skills and attitudes were suggested. But when they took those and they broke those down, they came up with two general categories for qualities of an excellent servant leader. One were attitudinal mindsets, and the other were behavioral skill sets. So what are the most common attitudes and the most common behaviors that are the qualities of a servant leader? And they ended up listing 10, the first 7 being attitudes and the last 3 being behaviors. I'm going to read through those. It's a pretty interesting research. It's not just anecdotal. It's pretty interesting research. But I want you to remember as I go through each one of these, there are 10 in all, 7 under attitude, 3 under behavior or actions. I'm listing these in the order of impact they have in practicing servant leadership. Most of these will not need any explanation, so I'll make my way through them. The first, in order of impact, is empathy. Empathy. Empathy is different from sympathy. In sympathy, you feel for people, but in empathy, you really feel with them because you feel and understand what they're going, through. Very important that we connect with people at the highest emotional level, and one of the best ways to do that as a leader is to learn the skill of practicing true empathy, of understanding and sharing the feelings of others, establishes an unbelievable close connection with them. That is the first and most important attitudinal mindset. Next is selflessness, where you take as a servant leader others first attitude, embracing one of the most important truths of leadership. It's not about me. Number 3, humble. Humble people are teachable. They're grateful. They seek feedback. They're not defensive. They give credit. Those are humble people. Number 4, authentic. Trust. We've spoken of that. It's a character and an integrity issue. It's how we go about building trusting relationships. 5th, compassionate or caring. Servant leaders genuinely care for the other person and show it. And they care for them first and foremost as a person as opposed as an employee. Next, open-mindedness. Not a know-it-all, but curious, a learner. Have reached the place of maturity that they understand they don't have to have all the answers, nor pretend that they have all the answers. And then the 7th attitudinal mindset in order is collaborative. Servant leader is collaborative. They see the value in adding others to the conversation. Those others add wisdom to enable us to make better decisions as a team or as an organization. None of us are ever as smart alone as we are with all of us. So they're constantly seeking input. Empathy, selfless, humble, authentic, compassionate, open-minded, collaborative. What about the behavioral skills? What about the behavioral skill sets? What are those? Well, first of all, they're all learnable. In fact, all of these, the mindsets, attitudes, are choices that we make. These behavioral skills, and there are 3 of them. They kind of round out the top 10 in terms of impact. First is active listening. Active listening. Maintaining eye contact, focusing, seeking, helping the other person on the other side of the conversation to feel heard and understood. And I've discovered over the years, maybe the best way to do that as the conversation ends is to ask this very important question. Do you feel like that you've been heard and understood? It doesn't mean that you agree. It doesn't mean that you're going to act on what they're suggesting or recommending from the conversation. But it's important that they feel that they have been heard and understood. These are 10 critically important. What they all have in common is that they all say the true servant leader sets aside their agenda, in order to focus on others. Let me encourage you in these 10 attitudinal and behavioral skill sets. Look at each one of them. Empathy, selfless, humble, authentic, compassionate, open-minded, collaborative, active listening, asking more than telling, asking, what do you think? Tell me more. What else? And then the last skill set is all about developing people, helping others to grow and to develop and to get better at who they are and what they do, lifting others up upon your shoulders. Someone said true servants have dirty shoulders and sore shoulders. So, in these 10, why don't you rate them maybe on a 1 to 6, 6 being almost always and 1 being almost never in practicing these attitudes and skill sets, and see how you do. And then take your 2 or 3 weakest areas and practice and work on becoming better at each one of those areas. These are the tools that we have at our disposal, all learnable skills and attitudes to practice servant leadership. Well, it certainly raises the question, if servant leadership is this important, then what hinders us? What prevents us from really practicing servant leadership? Why don't we? Well, I think the number one reason has to be pride. There are too many arrogant leaders that it's all about them. All about them, and all about them getting what they want when they want it and being in charge. And then that pride leads to fear or insecurity. We're afraid. We're afraid if we become servant-oriented that we might be taken advantage of, that we might be underappreciated, that we might be neglected. Who will serve me if I'm serving others? We might be overshadowed. We might be taken out of the spotlight. We might become really too dependent on others for our success. I'm telling you, my friend, all of those are phony and false fears. We don't have to choose between serving others and personal success. We can enjoy both. We can do good, and we can do well. Let me close our time together with some important thoughts, just kind of some miscellaneous, perhaps rambling thoughts on serving others for your consideration. Here's one. Serving others shouldn't be a strategy, but our identity. It's not only what we do, it's who we are. It's how we live, wherever we are, whoever we're with. We're serving others because it's who we are. Next, don't feel badly if you haven't lived this way, much less mastered it. Not many people ever master it. It's more of an aspiration than a destination. There's a huge shift that has to take place to move from self-serving to serving others. So cut yourself some slack, give it time. There'll be failures along the way, but keep striving in that direction. The results will be worth it. Next, serving others is not just a good idea. It requires intention and action. It's something you must do. You must do. Serving others is important. If it's important to you, I'm telling you, my friend, you'll find a way to serve. You'll initiate, you'll act, you'll go first. But if it's not important to you, you'll always have an excuse for not doing it. Another final thought. Everyone takes one of two approaches to life and to leadership. Some live entitled. I deserve it. I deserve everything. What do I get? What's in it for me? Or they live as a servant. What can I give? How can I help? I guess it boils down to which sentence dictates your life. I deserve or I serve. Which best describes you most of the time? So, what are the results of seeking, striving, initiating servant leadership? Well, the more you serve, the more success, the more opportunities you experience, and the greater influence you possess. One of my heroes is Martin Luther King Jr. He said and did a lot of great things in his all too short life. But one of my favorites, he said, everyone can be great because everyone can serve. Serving is the best way to impact the lives of others. It's the best way to lead. It always leads to higher engagement, higher performance, greater fulfillment, increased productivity. So let me ask you to close here 3 very important questions. Number 1, if the people you worked with were asked to use words to describe you, would servant be one of them? 2, when was the last time you asked someone, how can I serve you? How can I help you? And then 3rd, if your pay, maybe your influence as a leader, was solely based on serving others, how influential or how much salary would you receive? Thoughtful, penetrating questions. I know being a servant leader is a hard choice. It goes against our very nature, looking out for number 1, and our culture. So where do I begin? Well, I'm going to suggest, my friend, that you begin at home. Begin with family. Begin asking this all-important question over and over and over again, and then following through. How may I serve you? How can I serve you? How can I help you? Albert Einstein, pretty smart guy, I understand, from history, he said this: only a life lived in service to others is worth living. Albert Schweitzer, physician, great humanitarian, said, I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I do know. The only ones among you who will be happy are those who have sought and found how to serve. Earlier in this podcast, I asked you to think of someone that you consider to be a servant leader. Let me follow up with this question. Would anyone have thought of you? Go change that. Go make a difference in that. You'll be glad you did. Thanks for listening to Teaching That Transforms with Dr. Jimmy Knott. Remember, teaching only transforms when consistently practiced. I look forward to seeing you next time.